The entire restaurant industry in China is in real trouble.
One of the hardest hit sectors.
Like you said, people are still not taking it seriously enough.
Overwhelming uncertainty and financial risks.
That is unreal. Who really wants to go to a restaurant to eat fresh oysters right now? I think we closed 4 locations permanently. For 2 months, they're working for nothing.
What do we do, and how do we get back to normalcy?
Who knows? I don't know. We're not in the clear by far.
Hey everyone, Olim is here with Scholar Talk, where we discuss relevant issues of our modernity with experts and thought leaders from around the world. Today we will talk about one of the hardest hit sectors of the economy during the COVID-19 pandemic, the food and beverage industry, F&B. Across the countries stricken with the coronavirus, restaurants and bars are closing their doors to limit the spread of COVID-19. Business owners are grappling with overwhelming uncertainty and financial risks, while servers, dishwashers, cooks, and bartenders are finding themselves without a job almost overnight. And for many of the business owners, the rent was due yesterday. China was the first country to have been hard hit, and many businesses felt the pain, real pain. However, China, after implementing quarantine measures, have been able to stop the virus. And for the first time yesterday, there were 0 deaths reported. Most businesses are back, including cafes and restaurants that have opened their doors to the public. To talk about that, we're happy to have Alan Wong, CEO and founder of Hatsune Restaurant Group, consisting of 12 stores in Beijing and Shanghai. He's also a pioneer of California-style sushi in China. Alan, brother, how are you?
Good, man.
Good to see you here. Tell us, when did you come to China?
I came to China in early 2000, late 99, early 2000.
Wow, so that's 20 years back, exactly 20
Right.
years.
Exactly, yeah.
So tell us about the fact that you've actually experienced probably the crisis of financial crisis of 2008, and what is the difference between this crisis and the crisis that you've experienced before?
Well, okay, so even before that, there was a SARS crisis.
Right.
Which was a huge 2003. Yeah, that was a huge debacle on the Beijing government side and regarding the SARS crisis. But yeah, we've sort of been through a lot over the years in China. But how this is different, well, I mean, if you go back to the SARS crisis, actually, my type of restaurant, back then I only had one restaurant, one location. And so during the SARS crisis, I was actually very much supported by all of the foreigners living in Beijing. So all the Chinese people were really freaked out. And the economy on the Chinese side was actually hard hit. But those that were serving the foreigners living in Beijing weren't as hard hit because, just to be frank, foreigners just didn't really think that it would really affect them as much, or they were just so-called more brave going out. They just didn't really care, to be honest. And back then there wasn't any social media, so it was kind of
the news didn't spread
all
as
based
much
on
as it does now. It's not as fast.
Right.
It's not as grand in scope.
That's one of the major differences between then and now. SARS was actually also kind of nipped in the bud pretty quickly by the government as well. But I can't really say I remember much about it because I was actually spending all my time in the restaurant, and we were pretty full because, like I said, the foreigners were still going out. So there was that, and then we survived that. It wasn't that big of a deal, and I think that the Chinese companies that were hard hit during those times survived as well, because it was pretty quick from the time that it came out to the time that it was gone. I think total maybe 6 months or so, maybe a little longer, but again, we weren't affected as much. So I think maybe my revenue was down maybe 20% or 25% back in the day, and I only had one restaurant. So that's a huge factor. Now you come to 2008 or 2009 when the financial crisis hit, and then I actually feel that hit China a lot less hard than it hit the Western world. So at that time, the kind of exact opposite happened. So a lot of the foreigners stopped spending their money, but a lot of Chinese started, getting, because it just happened just after the Olympics. There's a lot of investment in China during that time, and just before that time. So a lot of Chinese got super rich during that time, and actually also after that time. So you're looking at a huge sector of the population that now has a ton of disposable income, and therefore they were frequenting my restaurants a lot. We were 80% foreigners and 20% Chinese, and at the financial crisis, it was the exact opposite. We were 80% Chinese and 20% foreigners after that point. So again, my restaurant company was supported by a group of the population.
And how many restaurants?
And at the time, so exactly. So at that time, I probably had 4.
Okay.
In 2009, 8 or 9. So why that makes a big difference is because when a restaurant company is taking a hit in terms of revenue, then you have your cost. And if there's no way to offset your cost by your revenue, then you can bankrupt yourself pretty quickly. So the more exposure you have in terms of the more restaurants you have, the more exposed you are, and the quicker your downfall is because of these accumulating costs. So what's different about now versus 2003 and 2008 or 9 is that there's no sector of the population that basically doesn't care or that isn't affected by this. It's every part of the population, and now with the social media and all the just general media, every day, every hour, like every aspect of every media is talking about this virus, and so people are very freaked out, and the numbers are looking very scary. In the very beginning of this thing, I actually wasn't that. I along with all the other foreigners in Beijing, weren't that convinced that this was that big of a deal, because we look at regular flu numbers, and all this kind of stuff, and I wasn't convinced that it was that big of a deal because. Like I said, China locked down Wuhan, and that's unprecedented. And I thought it was very strange that U.S. and Britain and other countries were taking their citizens out of Wuhan. I thought that was like a very, very extreme move. And now we realize, okay, this is extremely transmittable. It's extremely hard to detect because there's a lot of cases that are just non-symptomatic. And the most important piece is it lasts on surfaces a long time, and it lasts in your body a long time, before before it transmits to somebody else. So I think SARS had an incubation period of a couple of days. So if a couple of days later, if you were fine, that means you were fine. You can tell someone's sick pretty quickly. This one, you can't even tell they're sick, and so they could be sick sitting next to you, or they could be your wife and she has it, you have no idea. I have no idea how Boris Johnson, in the UK got it, and all these like high-level people in the UK, I have no idea how they got it. But then again, it lasts on surfaces for hours or days, like glass surfaces.
Well, they have exposure to many people, and they shake a lot of hands, and I think even Boris Johnson was bragging, if you will, that he still shook a lot of hands, and then unfortunately he got sick, and then he realized that.
I think people just didn't understand the severity, including myself. And
Nobody understood.
Yeah,
even today, we don't know much about this virus.
Right. So in the beginning, I was the proponent of this thing is just kind of like the flu, maybe a little more serious than the flu, but still kind of like the flu. Now we know it's way more serious. But back in the day, I was kind of in the very beginning of this thing, like late January, I was kind of like, people don't freak out. It's kind of like there's still the flu numbers are still way worse. But I had a very selfish reason for doing that. I mean, if nobody went out, my restaurants are empty, and I'm very, very much exposed now with 12 or 13 stores. So I have a lot of cost associated with no revenue. So in the end, though, it is very serious, and we did close several of our restaurants down for extended periods of time. Have now reopened most of them. Some of them we closed permanently. I think we closed 4 locations permanently. So I used to have 16 restaurants, and now it's 12. Wow. So so it's just that you do what you can to survive in this new reality, right? So it's for the restaurant business, it's the hardest hit industry. I can't say the hardest hit. Sorry, I mean airlines are very hard hit. Hotels are very hard hit.
It's one of the hardest hit, actually.
It's one of the hardest hit.
One of the hardest hit. It's not the hardest, because there's just so many of them. And there's so much.
So many, and then the cost.
Together.
The
Yes.
cost of the restaurant industry is very, very high. Now, here's the thing, though. Landlords did what they could to try to help, but they didn't do all that much. I mean, they gave us rent concessions for February and March, but as of now, I think everybody's
How
kind
much
of
were they?
expecting April. Everyone's different. Some people took half of the rent off of February. Some people gave all of February completely free. One of the landlords said, like, let's just take percentage rent, like take a 12% or 15% of your revenue, which is totally fair. I actually wish all of the landlords would take percentage rent indefinitely until this thing blows over, which basically means if I do well, they still do well. If I don't do well, they're in with me, like, as partners taking the hit, you know? So I think for
But you
landlords to
have
take
to
a percentage
negotiate
rent,
with them individually, right?
I have to negotiate with them individually, and most of the time they say no, for my requests,
Are they
because
private
they have
landlords
their,
or the government,
yeah,
or is it a government? Because
they're
we
not government,
learned
they're private.
they're private, right? Because the
Yeah,
government usually gave them gave their lessors free rent for about 1 or 2 months.
right. Yeah, some did.
Let us
But
go back to
they,
late January. I want to understand. So, majority of your restaurants, were you ordered to close down, or did you close your restaurants for temporarily, off of the concern for your for the public and for your customers?
okay, so twofold. First of all, we have to change the way we do business. We had to change the way we went from being completely environmentally environmentally conscious and this kind of stuff, to just buying disposable chopsticks and disposable everything.
Infections, probably,
And
right?
so yeah, and so that and then we had to for every restaurant we had to buy the scanners for temperature scanners, gloves for the staff, masks for the staff. We had to buy the alcohol cleaners so we can clean the entire restaurant in a different way. So all these things had to change. So we had to change the way we did operations, especially cleaning operations. And when customers come in, we have to scan them. And it's a very kind of crazy thing. In the beginning of January, it wasn't that bad. I actually was saying, like, we probably shouldn't do some of these things because it would kind of scare customers away, like wearing masks and this kind of stuff. But in retrospect, yeah, it's the right thing to do. I think everything that China's done so far has been the right thing.
Right.
Obviously, because this is, China's controlled it, and things are slowly getting back to normal. However, in the rest of the world, it's just going to shit. So
Absolutely. Now, if you compare and contrast, and you see what China has done in the past 2 months and what other
yeah,
countries are doing in the past month or so, I
right.
mean, it's such a stark difference, especially when we see what is going on in New York. New York has become the epicenter right now, and unfortunately, people are still going to restaurants. Many of them are not closed; they're all outside, and the virus, as you said in the beginning of the program, is spreading
Yeah.
very quickly.
Yeah, you can't change people's habits. You can't force people to change their habits, but you can scare them into changing their habits. But I think in China, everybody more or less knew that this thing could be very serious. When
Because of
when
the
when it hit
experience of
Italy
SARS.
really hard. Well, when it hit Italy really, really hard, because we saw Italians out in cafes and clubs and out, yeah, en masse. They were just out in general, and Italians love spending time outside, right? So, and then we saw the numbers, and it was just like, wow, that's pretty freaky, because like now you know if the way China did things was actually the right way, because you saw how hard hit other places were. And especially, why is New York and why is the US in general just so hard hit? Because, like you said, people are still not taking it seriously enough. They're still going out, and they're still doing this, not going to restaurants. Yeah, I mean, the number one priority for the US right now, especially the Trump administration, is to save face and to save the economy,
Right.
not to save the people, which is unfortunate. But yeah, China's motivation is just to stop this thing as soon
So
as possible.
I'd like to understand the process. So basically, you understood that some of them you have to close temporarily. In some of them, you had to implement
Yeah.
different means of servicing the clients. But then, at a certain point, you have closed down all of your restaurants temporarily, or some of them actually worked. And another question would be, how many staff did you have to fire, or did you have to get their salaries down? Were they cooperative? Can you talk about that? Can you talk about the insides of
Sure.
the
Yeah.
process?
So first of all, we decided that this needs to be addressed, and the government actually also was requiring us to do certain procedures differently. So we followed along with those. Then of course we had to close down to actually train and like implement these procedures. But then we were closed. We stayed closed for a while after Chinese New Year to sort of assess the situation and see actually how many people are coming out and going out to restaurants and stuff. Because if we open and we have 1 or 2 people, it's not worth opening. We have way more costs that are accumulating versus how much we're making in revenue. So it didn't make any sense to open for some venues. Some venues closed for several days, some closed for several months. But it's all different, compared to when you compare the locations and the habits of the people living around there. And then
The staff.
one of your questions, the staff, sure. So yeah, so we had to close permanently 4 restaurants. Why? Because those restaurants in general weren't losing money before this thing hit, but they weren't making a ton of money either. So they were in the black, but they weren't like far in the black. So I knew, based on the restaurants that were really like our superstar restaurants, the ones that are doing really well. I have like 4 or 5 of them that are doing really, really well. Those ones are sort of breaking even. So the other ones will definitely not break even, and it'll just accumulate a lot more cost. So had I kept them on the books, had I not closed them, had I kept them on the books, then my cash flow would have run out, would be running out by the end of this month, the end of April. Mm-hmm. Because I closed them, I bought myself another probably 1.5 to maybe 2 months of cash flow. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, all the other restaurants are open. We run a skeleton crew of maybe like 6 to 10 staff per day. And this, not just us, but all other restaurants that I know of are running skeleton crews. So everywhere you go right now, the service is terrible. Things take a long time, and the service quality is not very good. But we're just trying to make the best of the situation. So regarding the restaurants that I closed, yeah, all the staff that were working in those restaurants were all let go. Mm-hmm. And then currently, the people that are working still in these restaurants are taking a cut in salary, depending on, for example, me as the owner, but as the general manager of this entire operation, I stopped taking salary in January, so I didn't get paid for December, January, February. Since December, I haven't gotten paid since December. Taking no salary. So for me, I had 100% discount on salary. And then a lot of my staff, actually very touchingly, they agreed to donate their salary to the company. So they were working for free for a while. For 2 months, they were working for nothing. And then, starting April, depending on your level, if you're a high level manager, you take a bigger discount. So the highest level managers, like me, 100% discount. So I get 0 salary. Just under me, I have my CFO or like accounting department, whatever. They take 50% cut. Mm-hmm. Then you go down to the restaurant, like down and down and down, 25% and then whatever, and 10%. And then you get down to the general workers, and they take full salary.
Wow.
Now there are some staff that are being furloughed. For example, we have, in any restaurant, we can have probably anywhere between 30 staff and like 40 staff. But we only need 6 to 10 staff working at any given point now, right? So on the payroll, we only need 10 staff. Now, what's the rest of the 15 to 20 people going to do? We told them not to come back to Beijing from their hometown.
Okay, because they left for the New Year's.
Yeah, so we would pay them a monthly like general allowance, and it's 70% of the Beijing minimum requirement, which is actually the legal requirement in China. Mm-hmm. Not many companies are doing that. Actually, a lot of companies are furloughing their workers, meaning they keep them on the payroll, but they're not paying. So it's basically taking 0 salary, but staying in the company, staying as an employee of the company.
So how many active employees right now do you have?
60.
And before COVID, how many employees did you have?
Probably close to 400.
Close to 400. Wow, that's
yeah.
It's a big reduction.
Yeah.
What about during the quarantine? What did your restaurants provide as services? Did you have any deliveries?
So we did do a delivery program. It wasn't very successful. Mm-hmm. My thinking is that people associate my restaurant company with Japanese and sushi and this kind of stuff, cold foods, not cooked. So they maybe people thought that the risk was higher in this case. So our delivery program didn't work as successfully as we wanted to, but it's still, it's still something to do, and it's still bringing us revenue, but it's not moving the needle much. Luckily, at the middle of March, things started to turn around a little bit. So we started to see the weekends start to pick up quite a bit. And now weekend business is about, I would say 70% or 65 to 70% of normal. Only on the weekends. And on the weekdays, it's just back to dismal revenue for some reason.
Still today?
Yeah.
What about the supplies? During the 2-3 months of the quarantine and self-isolation, did your business have any problem with supplies? Because I know that a lot of your
right
come from Japan.
that was a challenge. Supply was a challenge, but the markets have since the markets have since opened, and we can pretty much get whatever we want now. But during those 2 months, I think we did run a slightly limited menu. There's a lot of things that we couldn't get, and there's a lot of things we didn't need to get. I mean, who really wants to go to a restaurant to eat fresh oysters right now? Not many people. Number one, it's expensive. So I think the general trend right now is people are downgrading their tastes. They're downgrading their spending in general. So normally you would go to like, 300 RMB restaurant. Now you might just consider doing that once a week. Whereas before you do that maybe two or three times a week, or maybe that was your standard 200-300 kwai. But then now you're gonna bring that down to about 100, maybe 150 kwai as your standard, and then every once in a while splurge on what you used to enjoy at 200-300 kwai. So the spending has changed quite a bit.
How long do you think this will last? This type of behavior,
well,
behavior.
Okay, so I am hoping that this thing, like the flu season, will end when summer arrives, which is basically end of May. So I'm hoping that case. And if it doesn't, then I think we're in real trouble. I think not just us. I'm saying the entire restaurant industry in China is in real trouble, and worldwide is in real trouble if it doesn't end by summertime.
Well, we see that COVID-19, the virus itself, isn't prone to heat. If you see the cases that are rising in Africa, in Australia, in South America, do you look at those numbers as well? Because it's hot in there and people are still getting
you never know, though. Something might happen where I'm just hoping, because otherwise because these landlords actually are getting more and more greedy. They gave us concessions for February and March, but April, I think most of them are expecting full rent. May, June, I can pretty much guarantee you they're going to want full rent. Now, full rent right now, when the market is so bad, is very greedy. I honestly think they should be taking a percentage cut so that they're in the same situation that we are.
Right.
Things are bad for us, shouldn't be good for them, right?
They're not going to get any. They're not going to get anybody else if you leave, right?
Who knows? I don't know. Presumably that's the case, but that might not stop them from squeezing me out at some point, right? They want what they want. I don't know if they know or not that they can or can't get anybody else. But presumably that's the case.
We see that in China, the situation is getting better, right? There are more and more people that are going out right now. We can see rivers of people going to Huangshan Mountain during the long weekend. So it seems that everything is coming back to normal. So if hopefully
we're not seeing
the virus
that yet.
is not going to come back yet, when do you think people will be much more at ease coming back to their daily normal life? Or do you think the world has changed?
When there's a vaccine that comes out, an effective vaccine, and people aren't scared of this thing anymore, that's when things are going to go back to normal.
But that will take at least another 8 to months to a year.
So in the meantime, it's just a game that we have to play with our staff, with our landlords, to try to control the cost, to try to survive. So right now is all about survival. Like I said, I haven't taken any salary since December, so my personal finances are getting a little bit stretched thin. at some point I'll have to take some sort of salary, maybe like 10% of what I used to take or 20% of what I used to take, just to have something to live on, right?
Right.
So I think for most people, they're changing the way they spend money until, because I mean, if money's kind of drying up for me, I assume that a lot of other industries is kind of going to dry up as well. I don't think people are just going to go out and start buying Mercedes right now. You know, I don't think there's going to go and buy that, you know, like that diamond ring or that like expensive watch. People aren't going to change their clothes, you know, per season as much as they did before. You know, go shopping and whatnot. I think retail and restaurants and like airlines and everything, they're not going to go back to normal until there's a vaccine.
So I'm trying
Right
to.
now, we can't travel anywhere. I mean, if you want to go to Thailand right now, you can't go.
No,
You
it's
know, I've just finished building an amazing villa in Bali, in the island of, you know, Bali Island, and it's a 3-bedroom villa with its own pool and everything, and I won't be able to go see it because I can't even fly there.
that's
You
right.
know, yeah. I mean, boo-hoo, who cares? But at the same time, it's like, you know,
No,
we
it's
need to
true
find.
because if you
Yeah.
think about it, China is sort of living in the future right now, meaning the
Mm.
post-COVID world, right? And everybody's
Right.
looking to China, everybody's looking to Korea, Japan, uh, and yeah, basically these three countries that have shown that number one, with strict quarantine, you can achieve, you know, what they have been able to achieve. But at the same time, what do we do, and how do we get back to normalcy? And then people, for example, from Russia, from Europe, from the US, and I'm talking to a lot of people in the US, and they're all asking these questions that I'm actually asking you right now. What do we do when everything goes back to normal, or will there be normal? So for you, when it struck you, basically understanding what COVID-19 represents, that it may be long term, did you ever think of potentially that you will be not able to be open any of the businesses when the virus will be over?
Um, okay, so for me, when the virus is over and people are coming back, that's obviously the best case scenario. We don't have anything to worry about because we're one of the very strong restaurant companies in China, and people love us. So you know, they love coming to our restaurants, and they love what we serve. Um, I never thought about. Okay, so I did think about what would happen if our finances ran out. If our costs are just way too high, we can't control them, we can't stretch it any further, we have to bankrupt. We have to go bankrupt. So that was a scenario. However, what will I do after that point? I have no idea, because the U.S. is so hard hit. It's not like I can go back to the U.S., find a job. You know, like no one's hiring. There's so many people laid off in the U.S. Like something like 3.3 million people within a week filed
14%
for.
unemployment rate as of today.
Unreal. That is unreal. So it's not like I'm going to go back to the U.S. Hey, like it's not working in China, I'm going to go back and find a job in the U.S. I don't think that's realistic. I think there's a lot of people looking for jobs everywhere. So for me, I have no idea. If this doesn't work, if we have to bankrupt the company, then I just have to
But
live off of.
it seems as though you don't have to bankrupt the company right now, because
Right now, no.
China
I'm saying,
has done something that
yeah,
nobody expected it to do, right?
yeah. Okay, so it's looking optimistic, but in the worst case scenario, because right now revenues, even in you know, right now in April, sorry, revenues aren't looking that great. Like I said, on the weekends we're 70% of normal, but on the weekdays we're still probably like 10%, maybe about 10% of normal, maybe a little bit more, 15% of normal. So imagine if landlords start collecting 100% rent when my business in the weekdays, 5 days out of the week, is 15% normal, but they want to collect 100% rent. I'm going to run out of money very, very soon in that scenario. So bankrupting the company is a very real scenario if this doesn't end within a few months. Not just for me, but for many, many, many companies in the restaurant industry.
I mean, if more people will not start going back to the restaurants on the weekdays.
It's gonna take a lot more people to go back to restaurants on the weekdays to feel a lot more comfortable to fill restaurants on the weekdays, so that there's revenue, so that we can pay our landlords what they want in the rent.
for example, in Russia,
That,
it is a must for all the restaurants to be closed right now until May 1st. And the head of the F&B Association of Russia said that come May time, 90% of cafes and restaurants may not reopen. 90%. That's
it's a very real possibility.
The
It's a very,
complete
yeah.
death of the entire industry. So what we see from China is that it really hasn't happened. And your example really shows that as well. What recommendations, what suggestions would you have for your colleagues and peers from all over the world that are suffering right now, who are basically sitting home with their restaurants closed and they only do, if they can, do delivery?
Well, backtrack a little bit. It hasn't happened yet. It still might happen in China because, like I said, numbers aren't coming up. Numbers aren't coming up to where they should be, and costs are increasing because landlords want their rent. So that's the message I want to get across. Is like I think in China it's still, we're not in the clear by far not in the clear. There needs to be a lot more participation in going out and a lot more loosening of restrictions. Right now, you can only seat 3 people per table in Beijing, so that doesn't help revenues at all. So these kinds of things, like I think it's going to take a lot more for us to stay alive. Let's put it that way. So yeah, we're not going to die yet, but it's a very real possibility that we also will, and everyone also will in China. Now, going back to you're saying what would I recommend for these people? Yeah, if they can cut their cost in a way that lets them stay alive for a few months and then see what's going on. I think a lot of restaurant companies, especially in the US, they own their buildings. And that's the best case scenario, because then you just have to let go of staff and just sit and wait, right? So in China, I think the majority don't, but I'm thinking some people do, and they're the lucky ones. But if you're renting your space, if you're leasing your space, like most of us are, landlords are going to want rent at some point. And so it's just, you have to cut your costs as much as possible. If you're sitting there, like the best thing you can do right now is to start that conversation with your landlords and say, hey, like, we need rent concessions, maybe free rent for a couple months. I sent a message at the end of January to all my landlords saying, hey, like, let's do a partnership where like you guys only take percentage rent, for until this thing blows over, like possibly summertime or whatnot. And none of them agreed. But if the Western world, including Russia, like if they're willing to have that conversation and say like, okay, let's get in this together, because you guys have been good tenants, since the beginning. So let's get in this together and like let's either succeed or take the hit together. I think that's the best way to do things.
Well, thank you for coming to our program. Thank you for sharing these news. So, well, we hope that it'll turn around faster than many people expect right now. I mean, if you compare it to everything that is going on in Europe right now, and we all know how much of foodies Europeans are, especially Italians, going to restaurants every day, of course, that has really stressed the entire way of life of not only the Europeans and the Western world, but actually the whole world here in Eurasia as well. So personally, I can promise you that as soon as I come out of the quarantine, I'm going to come and visit one of the Hatsunes, probably in Singapore, during the weekday, and contribute what I can for the fast recovery.
Cool. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you, Alan. Good luck.
Cool.